Good evening, Fright fans. It's Halloween, and so today I've come to you with another cool, spooky, Halloween-appropriate themed record. Sometimes we kind of go dark and gritty and hardcore and horrorcore, and sometimes we go sort of more light pop, sort of towards the thriller edge, Haunted House of Rock, Amityville, that sort of thing. And that's where we are again this year. This is one pretty obscure, one you're less likely to know about. Certainly, I've looked around online and the audio's not on YouTube or for download from any RIP blogs or anywhere else. So it's a little bit more on the obscure side. From the 80s, from Philadelphia, Igor at Midnight by Cage, parentheses, Drac ED. Actually, there's a accent mark on the so it might be Kage. Igor is an interesting choice, because that is a monster you don't hear much about. He certainly gets referenced enough. He's in the Monster Mash and all that for, a little line. But, there's no Igor movies, really, outside of, a Pixar movie many, many, many years later, like a cartoon kids thing. But basically, vampires, werewolves, or even specific, Dracula, Frankenstein. Who is Igor? I think he's sort of best known as being, Dr. Frankenstein's assistant. But interestingly, you read the novel, Mary Shelley's novel, and Igor's not in there. You watch the original classic Frankenstein, there is no Igor. Actually, Frankenstein does have a hunchback assistant, but his name is Fritz. And there's no Igor in, Bride of Frankenstein. Then there is an Igor character in later Frankenstein movies, but he's not a lab assistant. He's this kind of evil guy who resurrects the Frankenstein monster in place of, when Dr. Frankenstein's out because he wants revenge on a village. But these are the late Universal sequels I don't think people are even really thinking of. He might be cemented because Young Frankenstein, the Mel Brooks movie, has Igor, as the assistant there. And certainly lots of comedies and stuff. Years later, he's kind of gotten cemented into the culture. There's the Hunchback of Notre Dame, but that's different. And arguably he's not really a monster. He's a very sympathetic character who's just treated like a monster. And I could go deeper into that, but honestly, there's really no need to, because as soon as you start listening to this record, it spells it out. This is, as far as this guy's concerned, as far as Cage/Kage is concerned, this is Dr. Frankenstein's lab assistant with the hunchback. That's who he is. They just call him Doc as opposed to Dr. Frankenstein, but that's who he is, and that's who his character is in the song. But also it's interesting, so you don't hear much of Igor in hip-hop. The most obvious example, really, and kind of the only, apart from a quick one-liner and, a completely unrelated song, is the fact that Tyler, the Creator, made his 4th or 5th album, God knows, called Igor. And the way if you look at that album cover where he does himself up like Frankenstein, again, they're clearly referencing that Igor and that style of Igor being Dr. Frankenstein's assistant. Again, even though it never sort of really was. But that album, very much, it's barely rapping. It's sort of sing-songy. The production is interesting, but, anyway, I don't care about that. And the only other thing, then, is that crazy Rhapsody Warren G song called Prince Igor, but that's not this Igor at all. That's Prince Igor is in the Russian opera based on, the Russian Tsar from centuries ago, who was sort of a great conqueror. And that was a weird thing where they just took some Warren G lyrics from one of his other songs, one of his many non-regulator songs, whatever song it was, and they just basically took his vocals and put on a new instrumental, which is based on the classic opera theme, Prince Igor, and they got a new singer to sing it. And there's a crazy music video where, he discovers footprints on the moon, Warren G does, or his DJ does, or, one of his producers, somebody discovers footprints on the moon, so he takes a bunch of dancers and they invade, a NASA satellite system, and then his dancers start dancing, and then they bring up a screen, and then the Swedish singer is singing opera on the moon, and she's painted silver, Soleil, and ridiculous cheesy thing. It's not even, like I said, a real Warren G song, because he's in the video, though. And that whole thing was sort of presented as, the first time classical music or opera meets rap, which is not true, because, LL Cool J had that whole Crossroads thing with the big orchestra. Fat Boys On and On was an opera album. Ostensibly, it says so on the cover. And they do go to the trouble of writing out, a whole script on the inside if you read the notes. But anyway, who cares? We're here to talk about Igor at Midnight. And by Cage/Kage, and really, not much is known about this guy at all. This is, as far as I can tell, his only record. If you look real close to the liner notes, the writing is credited to R. Cage, so presumably that is the real name of Cage/Drac ED. I assume Drac ED is like a Dracula thing, like Drac. But again, who knows? Nothing anywhere else to tell us. Two producers on here. One has only worked on this record. The other guy, though, John Wilkes, is sort of a big producer who had a long career and also owned and operated this record label, Third Story Records, which is based on a sound recording studio in Philadelphia called Third Story, named so because it's literally on the third story of a building. It's kind of small, but it's been around for years. It's still in operation to this day. They've done a lot of stuff with all kinds of stuff. Like, there's only a few Third Story records, and like some of it's like country. There's a rock song. There's more novelty records. There's only a couple records, and it's, you know, all over the place because it's just a studio that kind of does whatever. But the producers there have worked with a lot of big people. King Britt, you know, who's the DJ for Diggable Planets, he did a lot of their projects. John Wilkes was in a production group duo. Him and King Britt were a team who produced a lot of records, you know, sort of post Diggable Planets. Although, actually, King Britt was down with this label well before Diggable Planets, so that's kind of interesting. But he's not on this song, so we'll kind of move on. But John Wilkes, his partner, he's sort of the producer here. And this is a really produced record. This is really, it's got some live instrumentation on here. You know, I assume almost none of this is sampled. There's a lot of guitar. The bass line sounds really funky. The sound quality is great. Like, this is a really cool, you know, a lot of times you get into like independent 80s stuff. The sound can sound really chintzy, you know, like kind of tinny and very metallic and kind of very like overly filtered 1,000 times over, you know, and the whole thing can kind of really low quality. That is not this at all. It sounds really good just sonically. Lyrically it's fun. He's got a pretty good rap voice. I mean, it's 1987. It's a novelty record about Igor, so it's not going to be like, you know, the next Rakim or anything like that. But, you know, for a fun Halloween record, he brings it. Like I would say, not quite as good like as Houdini are in House of Rock. Like, they're the real professionals and they really nail it. He comes up a little shy here, but compared to like other novelty records, like he sounds like a legit, you know, someone who actually has perhaps a real foot in rapping outside of novelty records. So the song isn't really about anything. I mean, it's about Igor and he's kind of cutting loose at midnight, I guess is the idea. It turns into, in the later verses, a little bit more of a monster mash, like all sorts of rappers, all sorts of monsters and stuff start making appearances, like Dracula and the Wolfman. There's a fun sequence in here where the DJ, who ostensibly is Godzilla, starts cutting up Thriller, and they actually do play some instrumentation from Thriller, as in Michael Jackson's Thriller, and they kind of mix it in there. Although he's not really cutting up Thriller, he's really cutting just sort of arbitrarily sound, and they're playing Thriller over the instrumental. But still, it's a cool surprise, you know, injection of Thriller. The fact that it is live instrumental, also on the B-side, which is the instrumental, although it has a lot of vocals on here, including like the background ad-libs, including the hook, including even one of the rap verses or the ends of the song. So it's barely an instrumental, but it doesn't have the full vocals like the A-side. But it's very free to do lots of stuff, like there's kind of a guitar solo towards the end and all. So it all just sounds really kind of lush and well produced. For a fun song, that's really not about anything, but it's about Igor. And again, he's someone who really doesn't get to shine. Like, how many records have we had, you know, hip hop and non-hip hop, you know, about Dracula, referencing Dracula, you know, like that's in there from all the way from like Jimmy Spiker to that, you know, Mad Hatter record and stuff. And by God, by 1987, Third Story Records was there to bring him. So here we go. I'm going to play a clip. This is just a really fun record for Halloween. They even mention Halloween in the song, so they're absolutely shooting for that. I don't know when within the year of 1987 it came out, but I wouldn't be surprised if it came out in October. It's October now. It's Halloween. So here we go. Listen to the song for probably the very first time, but hopefully not the last. Igor at Midnight.
Igor.
Thanks for watching.
I think we are ready. Flip the switch.
Master, you've done it. It's alive. It's alive.